Hi everyone, my name is Kate Theobald. I do have some notes and the text that I'm going to reference in this post, so you'll probably notice me looking down, but I want to make sure to accurately quote. So for this post, I actually want to look at one main issue that three specific issues that are in the text feed into. And I was really excited actually to see these issues grouped together because I feel that they're so interconnected that there's almost no way to separate them. So my main theme, my main issue that I'm looking at for this post is that money, or a lack of, and I'm talking about personal finances for the students, so money or a lack of money limits access to higher education and ultimately hurts the economy overall. So it's kind of my theme. The three specific issues that I'm going to be considering are higher education as a public versus private good, access and affordability, and lastly, the funding shift. So as I'm looking at the overall theme of money limiting access and hurting the economy, I think of something that my husband and I actually joke about a lot, which is our three mortgages. Of course, we don't technically have three mortgages, but those three that we joke about having are our actual mortgage, daycare, which for those of you who don't have children yet equals a mortgage payment, the amount you spend in daycare in a month, and student loans. That's the third. We spend as much together on student loans as we did rent and utilities in our first apartment. And neither one of us, we feel, took really an exorbitant amount, about $20,000 a piece. So together, it's a good bet. And we went to a state level school. We went to the University of West Georgia. So we're not talking loans for out-of-state tuition or anything like that. We were both Hope Scholarship recipients. We had things that helped with our education, but we still had to take out those loans. So that's where I look at money limiting access, hurting the overall economy. And there's several sentences on page 14 that I feel summarize the three issues that go into this very well. Right, while there continues to be federal aid available to assist students in funding their education, an increasing percentage of this aid is in the form of loans, which means that greater numbers of students are leaving our institutions with sizable debt burdens. The increased debt has a negative impact on the economy because that leaves less discretionary money for new graduates to spend on goods and services in their local communities. And that's really my main argument where I talk about public versus private, access and affordability, and the funding shift is that when students have to take out loans to complete their degrees, they're no longer contributing to the economy because their money is going into paying back those loans. So their contribution to the economy is delayed often by several years until those loans are paid off. So first, let's consider higher education as a public versus private good. Looking at who funds higher education. Where is that balance between student loan debt versus participation in the economy? And does that make a difference to what type of good it is? And it's asked in the text, who benefits more from additional education beyond the high school diploma? The individual receiving the education or society as a whole? I think the argument can definitely be made there for higher ed being a public good in a couple ways. To answer that question, who benefits more? Yes, the individual benefits, but society benefits as well. And society benefits more when those students don't have exorbitant student loan debt. Goes on to say that the rate of employment increases with the level of education, and second, the higher the level of education attained, the higher the income received. While on the surface these appear to be more private benefits, it is important to note that given these statistics, it is no surprise then that gross national products, GNPs, and employment statistics of countries with a higher proportion of higher education graduates appear to be impressively different from those with a lower proportion of higher education participation. So knowing that employment increases and higher incomes are received, that benefits the economy. That makes it, higher ed in some ways, a public good. It's also pointed out in our text on page 6 that the external stakeholders for higher education include our government officials, both state and federal, the business community, and the taxpayer base. Again, raises the question, doesn't this make education a public good? In the same way that K-12 education is seen as a public good, doesn't this make higher education a public good, especially now that secondary degrees, post-secondary degrees, are required to enter most fields? The second point I want to look at is access and affordability, which starts on page 10 of our text. About halfway down under that section, says if we connect access to higher education with affordability, the conversation shifts from geography to finances. If higher education is not affordable, then how can it be accessible? On the top of page 11, continues, while universal access may be an ideal to strive toward, it is not realistic within our current economic system. So I do feel it's important to point out that universal access is what is ideal to many people. They're not realistic right now in our current economic system. I want to take issue with that slightly. I think it is something that could be realistic within our current economic system. There are some states who are making at least community college accessible and available to everybody in the state. There are some systems that are making some four-year schools more accessible within their states. So I think that looking at these emerging models, we can base a national model around that and realize that the long-term benefits will pay for, or could pay for, the cost of making higher education accessible universally. And without universal access to higher education, I believe that the gap will continue and will widen between classes. Affordable higher education will lead to a stronger economy. So if we don't want there to be such a gap between the middle class and the lower class, if we don't want there to be as broad of a distinction between classes in the United States, higher education is what's going to help that. So there are many ways that the economy benefits when access to higher education is available. And like I mentioned earlier, people who attain at least a bachelor's degree, if not more, will contribute to their economy much quicker if they don't have the student loan debt. Just to give a very real example of that, in our family, we have said that we are driving my husband's car until the wheels fall off or until our daughter starts pre-K and we no longer have that daycare cost, because most of our money is going into student loans, so we cannot afford both childcare and a new vehicle. Well, that vehicle purchase contributes to the economy, and that's something that we're having to delay by at least 4 to 5 years because of the student loans. If the student loans weren't there, it wouldn't be as much of a concern for us. Looking at my last point about the funding shift, page 13 is where I'm starting, writes that states have become minority partners in the colleges and universities. So whereas states used to have a lot of autonomy, more so than they do now, now they're becoming minority partners. And as individual states have decreased their respective financial support, the burden is thrust upon students and their families. So states have been contributing less, which means that cost is rising. It's actually noted also here on page 13 that a dramatic increase in tuition has not occurred simply because of inflationary pressure. In fact, these increases have consistently outpaced inflation. So yes, you would expect dollar for dollar that we're spending more today in 2017 than, say, our parents did in the 80s, or even further back than that. However, it's not just adjusted for inflation. These prices have gone up dramatically. Even if you account for inflation, the generations now are paying significantly more for their education, incurring more student loan debt, delaying their contributions to the economy, or even in many cases not completing their degrees at all. Some cases being left with student loan debt and no degree. So in that way, really people aren't contributing to the economy. So I think that is how we're connecting higher education and the structure of higher education to the economy in a very real way. And if we look at education as a good and we consider whether it's a public or private good, the argument is there, and I would agree with it, that we can see higher education really as a public good that needs to be more accessible so that people can contribute better to their local economies and contribute faster to their local economy. We think students graduate from college and then they go into the workforce and then they're a contributing member of society financially, but that delay is there because of the cost and the lack of access that cost places on the students. Is really a financial burden to the students. So that's my main issue. Of course, lack of money limits access and ultimately hurts the economy overall. And so that is how I am linking 3 issues that I believe really are one issue to the structure of higher education and how that has impacted our economy. Thanks.